2020 meeting of the Planning Commission Working Group to order. And Ms. Cook, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Mr. O'Connor?
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member. Ms. Leverns?
Here.
Ms. Leverns is an at-large member also. Mr. Haldeman?
Here.
Mr. Haldeman represents the Berkeley District. Mr. Colster?
Here.
Mr. Colster represents the Jamestown District. Dr. Rose will be joining the meeting later. Dr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Ms. Knoll? Ms. Knoll is not able to join us at this time. She represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Croft?
Here.
Mr. Croft represents the Powhatan District and is chair of the PC. Ms. Wortman?
Here.
Ms. Wortman represents the Community Participation Team, and we have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Cook. And just a reminder, as we've been doing for other meetings, to use the raise your hand icon if you'd like to speak, and I will do my best to see those things when they pop up. Ms. Cook, would you want to introduce the staff and the consultants?
Yes, thank you. I am Ellen Cook, Principal Planner, and joining me today from James City County are Paul Holt, Tammy Rosario, Thomas Wysong, Tori Haynes, Tom Leininger, Terry Costello, Julie Northcott Wilson, Chris Johnson, and Alex Berg. Also joining us are our partners in this comprehensive plan update, our consultants Vlad Gavrilovic and Todd Gordon from EPR PC, and Leanne King from Clarion Associates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And welcome, everybody. As you know, there's a resolution in our packet that allows us to conduct this meeting virtually. And without reading the entire resolution, I'll summarize it. On September 8th, 2020, the board readopted the continuity of government ordinance, which under certain circumstances permits this committee to conduct today's meeting by electronic or telephonic means without a quorum of members physically present. May I have a motion for adoption of that resolution?
Haldeman moves.
Thank you, Jack. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Although we don't have a dedicated public comment period for these meetings, we do allow the public to submit inputs either through telephone calls, emails, or other means. Ms. Cook, were there any public comments for this meeting?
No, there were no comments received for today.
Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the September 28th joint meeting with the Planning Commission Working Group and Community Participation Team. May I have either a motion to approve or any changes or amendments to those minutes?
Ginny, I move to approve.
Thank you, Ginny. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Opposed? All right, thank you. I'll now turn the meeting over to the planning and consultant team for the presentations and discussions.
Thank you very much. This is Paul Holt, Mr. Chairman, members of the working group and team. Welcome and good afternoon. I'm going to lead this first section, talk a little bit about where we are in the process, what our mission is for tonight, and some of our recommendations on the format for the meeting tonight. Gosh, you know, Mr. Chairman, you all are used to staff giving you all a whole bunch of information, and you all do such an admirable job about getting through it for each of these packets. In recognition of the fact that we gave you extra information as part of that Planning Commission Working Group packet on 9/28, what we wanted to sort of start with the first half of tonight's meeting is to revisit some of those key issues and key items. We realized that with the briefing paper that was presented and with all of the information that was in that accompanying PowerPoint, that was a lot to digest. And so in a minute here, I'll walk through sort of a suggested format of revisiting those, maybe throw out to the PC working group some prompting questions, because sort of the importance of our next milestone, and that is sort of getting to the October 27th joint work session for the board, is quickly approaching. And I do mention we want to take about the first half of tonight's meeting to get through that, because we still have 2 chapters that we want to introduce to you tonight as well. And we'll save that for the back half of tonight's presentation. So we'll kick it off. If you could advance the slide for me. For the first half of the meeting tonight, I'll get the wavy hand to pull it up for me. First half of the meeting is white space and does not mean the meeting's over. Just bear with us 1 minute.
Are you having trouble, seeing the screen? I'm not sure why this blanked out. If you could give me just a minute, I'm going to stop sharing and try to reshare.
Sure, that's okay. So, a little bit, while we get the PowerPoint fixed, nothing you all haven't already seen, but we want to make sure that our viewing public is able to follow along. Give us just 1 minute here, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, take your time.
All right, does that work now?
There we go.
I'm going to leave it
There we
off
go.
of full screen in case that was the issue. So let me know if you can't see it fully. I'll zoom out just a little bit more.
I think it looks good, Leanne.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the working group, this will really be our agenda for the first half of the meeting. Again, we're going to do our best as staff and the consultant team to facilitate the conversation, to try to help us stay on schedule. Start off a little bit by talking about schedule and background. Then we kind of want to come back to the preferred scenario framework and revising the plan framework and next steps to then be considered, to then be followed by considerations for discussion at this meeting and next. Next slide, please. A little bit about where we are in the process. We're trying to cover this piece really at the beginning of most all of your meetings. There are a lot of moving parts. I think once we get a little bit further into the meeting this evening, where we start to talk about the vision and the goals, that will start to look very familiar to you all who have been on a comp plan update with us before. Those are all very critical and core components of all of our comprehensive plan updates. And, again, as we get further into this meeting, again, that discussion on the goals, and as we start to get into the chapter updates, the initial chapter updates and the initial chapter reviews, again, that should feel very familiar to you all. We followed that process over the last couple of comp plan updates, and I think that will really start to help in addition to kind of going through the schedule. That will hopefully help you all really get a sort of good sense of timing on where we are in the comp plan update process. But before we get to that, we wanted to kind of come back a little bit to this plan framework, and because that's the big additive piece that is helping to create this overarching connection throughout all of the comp plan update and really provide a lot more information and a lot more value added into what will ultimately become the final recommended comprehensive plan. But at this point in the process, what you're seeing, you see the "We Are Here" sign there in the middle of your slide. We're really at a pivot point. We're heading out of the scenario exploration phase of the process and starting to head into that very recognizable draft plan phase of the process. Again, at the last meeting, we talked a lot about the preferred scenario framework as sort of the last step in that scenario exploration phase. And again, tonight and this week, we'll start talking more about policy considerations and how those help to guide the draft plan. Tonight, we want to do 3 primary things to help this process move forward to that, move forward in general, and also to that October 27th board work session. 1, we want to affirm, based on what the recommendations of the PC working group are, we want to affirm what we want to show to the board as it relates to the preferred scenario. 2nd, we want to affirm what we want to show and share with the board on initial policy considerations, what the PC working group's recommendations are. And then lastly, we want to affirm the general sequence of meetings and the role of the PC working group in the development of the draft plan in the coming couple of months. All of that direction would provide really, really good guidance to your staff team and to the consultant team. And again, we want to be able to get through this so that we can stay on course and on par for the beginning of our chapter briefings, which will start tonight. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a few suggestions for tonight's meeting. To help move tonight's meeting forward, we'll be pausing at certain points in the presentations to ask you for your affirmation about how to proceed. This will be there to seek affirmation again on what to share with the board, whether or not to revise the existing vision statement, whether or not to revise the existing goals, and what, if anything, to add to each of the policy considerations presented for the 9 comprehensive plan chapters. Again, to be finished there at the end with a general affirmation on schedule and steps. We're going to propose to move through these steps. So we'll use the first one here as an example. We're going to propose, Mr. Chairman, if you're amenable, we're going to propose to do that through a series of straw voting. And we may end up doing a roll call because we're not in person, we don't have the advantage of me being able to see you all raising your hands and the like. But I really do think that getting some of those affirmations through a straw vote on each of our substantive items would, again, help to meet our objectives tonight about wanting to confirm what we share for the board and giving staff good direction as we're moving forward. So next slide, please. Great, thank you. So let me start off first, if I may, by revisiting some of the materials that we provided at your last meeting on September the 28th. The first one I want to talk a little bit about was on slide 20 of that previous presentation. That was the discussion where we had listed, based on all of the public input to date, based on all of the themes, based on all of the public engagement exercises, some additional planning concepts that look to be important to build into this comprehensive plan update. There's a lot of detail into what each of these mean. That detail we will get into, and you will start to, assuming there's consensus to move forward here in a minute, there'll be a lot of detail sort of built into the chapter updates and a lot of update as we consider future GSA updates as well. So again, just by introduction and way of summarizing what those planning concepts are, they were designing with nature. And again, that's a design that is sensitive to our natural context, our rural character protection, and economic growth, especially in areas of agritourism. Number 3, the idea of complete communities and building in provisions to allow our policy documents to meet the demand for walkable and mixed-use communities. Number 4 is housing flexibility. You see a graphic there. We've talked about this before, but this idea about allowing for the code to respond to it and setting up the comprehensive plan as a policy basis to set the stage for the county meeting this demand for missing middle housing. And as some of the work of the Workforce Housing Task Force concluded, what that can mean to further advance those goals as well. Number 5 is placemaking for economic development. You're going to hear a lot about that later on this evening with Mr. Johnson and our review of the comprehensive plan chapter. And that's really getting at the new paradigm for affecting and attracting high-wage employers and what that could mean to James City County, and where, from a land use point of view, how the comprehensive plan plays a very prominent role in that. And then lastly, but not leastly, is item number 6 there, the idea of improving connectivity and transportation choice. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you to help facilitate the discussion, but staff is really interested in knowing, staff and the consultant team is knowing, again, maybe through this straw poll voting system that we're suggesting, is there consensus that the 6 listed concepts should be incorporated as high-level concepts to be expanded upon in this comprehensive plan update?
Thank you, Mr. Holt. And my inclination as we go through these various affirmation modules is to do the roll call vote just so that we know how overwhelming or if there's some concerns on that. So we'll plan to do roll call votes. And at this point, any discussion on those additional planning concepts?
Hi, Rich, it's Jack.
Yes.
I missed the word additional when we got the printed version of this last week. And so I made some comments, and I just want to make sure I understand. These are in addition to, like, for example, housing flexibility, demand for missing middle housing. That would be in addition to the affordability issue, right? And that's not the only part about housing flexibility.
Yes, no, that's not the only point. These aren't meant to be exclusive. These are areas where we'll work to bring some supplemental information to there, maybe some areas where looking all of the input, looking at what citizens are saying, look at some of these other allied efforts. These really represent some key areas where we could have, again, just some real value added into this comprehensive plan update, in addition to all the other things that we've been talking about and the items that are normally in there. Yes,
Good deal. Thanks.
Okay. Ms. Leverance.
Yeah, along those same lines, the rural character protection, this would be in addition to it, and we have already included a possibility of decreasing density in rural lands. Is that right?
Correct. That's still in there for us to talk about at a detailed level in the near future.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Wortman. Jenny?
Sorry.
Oh,
Yep,
sorry.
I was muted. I just wanted to be sure that in including these, we would hear more about specific areas where these principles have been applied and worked and or didn't work, so that we could basically take the best of others' experiences as we take account of these things. In other words, I don't want them to be mandatory, if that's the right word.
No, I mean, you know, all of those sort of detailed nuance pieces, again, you all will have the primary lead in helping us to shape up early on. So, you know, again, a lot of that will kind of get to the GSAs and continued public input and continued direction to be received by the PC working group. But that level of decision is not what we're asking for tonight. So you don't have to worry about that's part and parcel to this recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Polster.
From a conceptual point of view and at a high level, it's hard to disagree with this. You know, it's kind of an apple pie and mother. But when I use the word aspirational, which is what the comp plan is about, and I go back and I look at these same aspirations in the current goals, strategies, and actions, I find almost all of these things are already in the current comp plan. And so I'm trying to figure out what the delta is. And I draw the line between stating an aspiration and getting something done, which was the point of the 2035 strategic strategy. And so my case in point that I put in the note that I put together was I took the housing flexibility in the middle piece. And I think the things that we're talking about, which Jack asked about, the affordable housing and the fact that we do have a housing task force that, in fact, talked exactly about the AMI level of what we should target. And those link right back to the current goals, strategies, and actions. So what is it that we intend to refine when we've already spent a lot of money on a task force with a report that requires money to execute, that we're going to add more value added to the housing flexibility question? Let me go on to a couple of the other ones that fit in the same way. When I look at the rural character of that document, I was thrilled to see some recognition about agricultural tourism, ecotourism, and agritourism. And it took me back to a plan that we have that talks about how to facilitate those things, but there's been no money to go ahead and execute against that. The aspiration's there within the comp plan, but the ability to execute those good ideas are not there. So I'm back to now going through about 3-4 other ones of these that fall in the same way. We're going to talk about placemaking and economic development. It's amazing to me how well that portion of the current comp plan is done. And when I look at a recent study done by the Weldon and Cooper folks that goes and looks at all the economic development that's going in the state and what they recommend as the highest things by the survey, guess what? Our goals, strategies, and actions align to that pretty well. So I'm puzzled as I look at these. From an aspirational point, absolutely. Do they align with what we've been saying? Absolutely. But what value add are we going to get at the next set of steps that we don't have already?
So, gosh, you know, again, I think we're going to sort of come back to that very question when we get further into these chapter updates and when we get further into the updates and refinements of the GSAs. So I think you have a very valid set of questions. And I think, you know, ultimately, if these are the 6 planning concepts that you all hear at this phase and stage in the process, if you all validate those and want us to proceed, I think that's exactly the information that staff and the consultant team are going to be challenged with bringing back to you all to see how that grows, for sure. You know, the idea of housing, I don't have answers for all of these tonight. Again, all this is a work in progress, and I know we're here in the background making note of some of these things to make sure they come back to you. But, again, the issue of housing flexibility, for example, the idea that the work of the Workforce Housing Task Force was just so good and valuable, but as a standalone document, there was a lot of discussion by that task force at the end about understanding that the real value of their recommendations was now trying to get that incorporated in and weave it into the larger comprehensive plan. And so, again, some of those recommendations were aimed at rehabilitating existing housing stock. Others were focused around the housing production side. And certainly the degree to which some of those recommendations can be better interwoven, updated, have the GSAs reinforce sort of the idea of now how that goes into the larger land use strategy for the county in this next 20, 25 years of this policy document. I think that's the end goal that the task force was really looking at. And again, ultimately, as we get further into these chapter reviews, you will start to see how that really lives in the comp plan, and then that's going to be a very important component part that we get back to you in answer to your question.
Oh, I appreciate that, but I'm at the point where I'm trying to figure out the conceptual pieces of this and the land use map that's being proposed and the value add that's going to be there. And so on the connectivity and transportation choices, I've asked for the Green Space Gateway program, the Bicycle Master Plan, and a couple other things that our folks have put together to be able to see how we're going to do those things on top of plans that would impact land use now and how we could apply those within the current comp plan, or to even find out of those plans what they are to be able to make the connectivity piece work. And so back to the housing is, I hope we get a chance to talk about how this alternative, the preferred plan is going to help housing, affordable housing. And that's the connectivity that I'm looking between the concept and the land use map that's being proposed.
Yeah, and again, we'll get a chance to kind of come back to some of that in more detail. Gosh, talking about the connectivity and transportation choice for a minute, again, I'll talk about this a little bit more. We still have all of the other components when it gets to what becomes of the development on the ground. So sort of set that aside for just a minute. Since the comp plan is a long-term, county-wide, big picture policy document, you really kind of need to raise back up to that 50,000 square feet. And the most prominent example I can think of for number 6 in terms of this value add, again, has been this idea that the future land use map, some of these future policies are going now with this plan update are going to be based with the added benefit of having the transportation model and the fiscal impact modeling to go along with that. And within that are certain assumptions and the integral piece of how connectivity and transportation plays into land use, right? So that transportation is not that piece you think of only after the land use map has been developed, but this idea that we're going to be weaving those together and areas ultimately that you all feel are going to be comfortable for more density, for more mixed use. All of that factors into the effectiveness and advancing some of the public input that we've received about creating and planning for opportunities for more connectivity and transportation choice. So, again, that's a much higher level than some of the parcel by parcel analyses that we're going to get to when we talk about land use applications. But again, conceptually, that's how some of that is going to factor in.
Oh, thank you. And remember, I did vote yes on this at this level.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. And I'll just add too that I think endorsing additional planning concepts like these will help further down the road when we are competing for dollars, at the county level, or in competing to have projects or ideas incorporated into the county's strategic plan. So I think, to Frank's point, at a high level, I also think these 6 items, these additional planning concepts, do a nice job of supplementing what is already in the comprehensive plan as well. So, any other comments or questions? If not, then what we're looking for then is an endorsement of these additional planning concepts. And as I said, I'd like to do a roll call vote, if Ms. Cook would be so kind as to go through that.
Certainly. Mr. O'Connor?
Aye.
Ms. Leverins?
Yes.
Mr. Haldeman?
Aye.
Mr. Coulter?
Aye.
Dr. Rose? I believe he's not with us yet. Ms. Null? Not present. Mr. Croft?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. And I'll turn it back over to the planning and consultant team for the next.
Yeah, so this is Paul. I'm going to stick with this subject a little bit more, because with sort of part and parcel to that earlier conversation about the planning concepts. And, I'll add, if you all as a planning commission working group, as we're getting our materials here planned for that board work session, if there are seemingly some others sort of within the context of everything that we just talked about, if there are others at that level that we are seemingly conspicuously missing, email those to us. We'll try to pull those together. It seems like these 6 are pretty inclusive of everything that we've talked about to date. But if they're not, let us know, and we'll revisit those with you potentially at your next meeting. So let me switch, if I could, a little bit to the framework map. So this is another one of those really big, high-level pieces that, in terms of synthesizing public input and synthesizing some of the framework of the plan, that was sort of the quote-unquote new part. So the parts that you all haven't traditionally seen as part of the last few comprehensive plan updates. We talked at our last meeting a little bit about what this map is, and had just an outstanding briefing paper that accompanied the last packet that went into a lot of really, really good detail. This map is really intended to be a general geographical representation of the themes we've received to date. We had some really good input at one of our earlier exercises about areas that citizens would like to keep versus change, the character of. Obviously we had a tremendous amount of input versus the citizen survey. And part of what's sort of new to this planning process is also that idea of the conceptual place types, and what place types look like inside the PSA and place types look like outside the PSA, especially with trying to be responsive to the citizen input of trying to certainly maintain and increase efforts to maintain rural character, increase efforts to direct new growth and redevelopment to appropriate areas inside the PSA, of course, in recognition that not everywhere in the PSA is equal to the others. And which also, as a framework map, plans for the residential and non-residential control totals that were agreed to for this comp plan horizon year of 2045. Again, those control totals, not to say that's what we are going to be, but it's a plan. It's just a high level plan. So in that context, this map should really only be used in the context of potentially public input to determine if potential refinements to the policy framework for the comp plan updated are needed at this step in the process, realizing there's a lot more information and a lot more to come, especially when we talk about developing the future land use map. So to that end, that's what this map is definitely not. It's not a future land use map. It's not a proposal for what the future land uses are going to be. It's just one possible pattern, again, that sort of helps guide the scenario planning process. And it's certainly not a zoning map. Specific changes to land use designations for specific parcels are going to be considered by the PC working group in the near future. Mr. Haldeman, others have started to send those to us. We've gotten applications in from various landowners, so that process is already moving. We will catch back up with that at a near future meeting. Ultimately, as I just sort of alluded to, again, as a long-term document, ultimately that means, and as you all know, at your regular Planning Commission meetings that we have at the first Wednesday of every month, development that actually occurs is guided by many factors, which that's going to include, market forces, demographic and socioeconomic trends, legislative approval process, and how rezonings and SUPs, when you get into levels of detail, how those factor in, and development requirements found in the county code all go to help frame up and sort of guide the development that actually takes place. So based on all of the information presented in that last packet, slides 18 and 19 of that Planning Commission Working Group agenda packet last time had the map that's on your screen now. And before we did anything more with this, before we jumped too far down and started looking at the key elements of that, we wanted to step back a little bit. I think you all had a lot of questions about this last time, and some of them we were able to answer, some of them we needed to get back to you on. But recognizing that part of the goal today is to help determine and frame up what we share and what we think might be a useful tool for an update to the board later this month. Is the key question I want to put in front of the PC working group is, should this key idea map and conceptual place type map be used as an interim step and a process benchmark for public input to determine if those potential refinements to the policy framework for the comp plan are needed at this step or at this point in the process? If not, we don't have to use it. So in other words, should this step be eliminated in favor of another option could be moving from the public engagement results from round 2. Those would be the general preferences for results that were represented in that alternative scenario B map. We could move straight from that into development of a future land use map later this fall and sort of take this framework map and set it aside from the time being. So, again, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it over to you for some discussion and for some feedback on that with the straw poll vote, if we could.
Okay, and just to clarify, not to oversimplify, but the conceptual place type map is just basically taking the citizen inputs that we've received, the survey and the assembly and so on and so forth, and said, okay, based on that feedback, this place, these are some examples of the types of places where they would fall inside and outside the PSA, for example. Is that?
Yeah, but again, it's not so much focused on what color lies where. We had, I think on the next slide, we've talked about some of the high level key ideas. We had 5 key level ideas, and it really would just sort of be at that level to to test public input further to see from a big picture framework point of view, are we headed in the right direction or did we miss something? Understanding the process that you all are all familiar with when we get into developing the future land use map, that's going to be a good point when we can revisit some of those parcel by parcel pieces.
Okay. Mr. Haldeman.
Thanks, Rich. Whether or not we use this map is, I don't have an answer. But the location, and I understand it's conceptual, and I think I know what conceptual means, but the location of some of these it just doesn't seem to me to be consistent with our themes and so forth. And I guess maybe that's where some of the dots really lay, but it can be misleading if we're not careful in presenting it to the board. That's all. The other point I wanted to make, and Paul alluded earlier to the use of the two population figures that, again, they're not goals or anything else. They're just projections and used as an apples to make sure the two scenarios are apples to apples. But a 120,000 population in James City County in 2045, with the traffic that will surely follow and the effect on watersheds and so forth and so on, is really not consistent with our 5 themes or with the wishes of the residents, in my opinion. And I would kind of like to find a way to make that point as well. Yes, we had to use 120 for both scenarios, and we're choosing scenario B, but that doesn't mean that 120,000 people is consistent with the wishes of our residents or with our 5 themes. So.
That's a good point. And, and also, I think we also keep in the back of our mind that that 120,000 essentially is a projection based on current conditions and so on. And maybe, that brings home the fact that we need to, if that's the consensus of the citizens and the board and so on, we need to take actions so that population figure doesn't get achieved.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Rich. And if we somehow manage to get a lower density in the outside the PSA rural lands, and then take the higher that density and push it inside the PSA, even though it's in a more limited space. And unless we protect a lot of open space within the PSA, I don't think you're going to meet the wishes of the residents. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Ms. Wertman.
Yep, I'm unmuting again. I asked a question with regard to the affirmation question. Because the affirmation question was, should it be used as an interim step and process benchmark to help guide consideration of potential refinements? And to be honest, I really wasn't sure what that meant. I accept that it's conceptual, and I hear my colleagues note places where the concept doesn't seem to meet, the placement of the blob doesn't appear to meet the input that we receive from citizens. And even though it's conceptual, it's very hard not to read more into this map than anybody wants to read into it. And so my question is, if we're going to start looking at parcel by parcel things, what purpose does this map actually serve? Who's going to see it again? And what conclusions are they going to draw from it?
That's a great question.
I'm sorry to be sort of naive about this.
No, I think that's an outstanding question, because the same one was rattling in my mind as well. Is okay, and you framed it very well. Who's going to see it, and what's the use of it, and are there some misleading blobs on there that will cause people to jump to conclusions? And I'll turn it back over to Mr. Holt to address those questions.
Yeah. No, I think those are great, and I'm gonna lean on Vlad to help me a little bit in context about his ideas about how this could be used moving forward. But I take Ms. Wortman, I take your concerns very seriously, because ultimately that's what we're trying to avoid, right? If what we're trying to convey in this graphic is something other than the public or someone else sort of having their eyes led to a specific color in a specific area, if that's not really the intent of this exercise, then we may have just answered our own question, that this might not be sort of what it's going to drive a different answer to the question that we're asking, and therefore it might be advantageous just to sort of skip over this tool for now. But Vlad, should we choose to move forward, how would this sort of fit into these next steps?
Sure. Good evening, all. I agree. Those are very important questions, and certainly it's the will of the working group as to how you'd like to do this. One thing I would point out is that the map did serve a very vital function, in that this map, or a slightly different version of it, was in the MetroQuest survey, and the public reviewed it and gave their kind of opinions on it and preferred this scenario over the other scenario. So I think it's an important benchmark in the process to say that the public had a view of this map, as well as the supplemental images and numbers that went with it, and kind of registered their preference. Now, it may be that that's mission accomplished for the scenario planning, and it really just needs to be the scenario B that was in the MetroQuest survey, and really not this conceptual framework map, which is very similar to that, but just kind of tries to distill it down to a few basic concepts. So that's up to you all. We could carry forward to the board the scenario B framework map that was part of the MetroQuest survey, and just not include this map at all.
If I could just make one more comment. I agree, Vlad, that it was very helpful in allowing the people who participated to assess the differences between sort of as is and alternative as is. But the thing that worries me is there were only 134 people, which I accept that may be good given the detailed nature of this exercise. But still, I imagine there are, plenty of people in the county who might look at this map and read more into it than we would like to be read into it. So with that, I will be quiet.
No, that's great, Jenny. And, I look at it similarly, that the conceptual place type map was very helpful for the MetroQuest survey in trying to give them a point of reference. But now that it served its purpose, at least up to this point, I'm with you. And we'll do a roll call vote eventually after the discussion is over. But I think that this will be more of a distraction than helpful. I think it served its purpose during the survey, but I would be a little reticent at this point in including it in the package going to the board. Anybody else?
Yes, Frank here.
Oh, Frank.
First off, I want to endorse Paul's suggestion that we put this aside and just move on to the land use map. I think that's an excellent idea. But what this framework map did for me was, if you didn't like it, what would you think of as an alternative? But there's always the argument that I'm always into that says, you better say something nice about it first before you say something that you don't. And there are some really nice ideas here. So I'm okay with setting this aside and moving on to the land use map.
Okay, thank you, Frank. Anyone else? Don't see any.
And we'll take you up on your offer to revisit the nice items at the next meeting, for sure. We like nice things.
Do it now.
All right, I don't see any more hands. So it appears from the discussion that what's on the table is a motion in a sense, or a suggestion. It's not a formal motion, a suggestion to set this conceptual place type map aside for now, move directly to the land use map in our process. So Ms. Cook, would you, wait a minute. Frank, did you have another comment?
No, I just wanted to lower my hand.
Oh, okay. And Mr. O'Connor?
You know, I find the conversation really valuable, and I really think that is the benefit of this conceptual place type map. You know, Mr. Haldeman made the comment that he doesn't think this map supports the 5 priorities. And I happen to subscribe to what Ginny says, that I think we're basing this on a very small sampling. But at the end of the day, I think what this conceptual map does is really help to reinforce the conversation, especially when it will come to higher density inside the PSA. You know, what affordable housing looks like. You know, I was talking to a contractor recently, driven off of one of the applications that we have for a land use map. And it's lots outside the PSA. And, you know, it's going to cost them $10,000 per well, $6,000 per septic system, which is, you know, $6,000 more than a JCSA hookup. So when we talk about some of these things in affordable housing, you know, we're going to have to look at it within the PSA, or we're going to have to adjust the boundaries of the PSA to meet all these requirements. So, you know, I don't want us to get off track on the conceptual place type map, but I find it to be very valuable to help people understand what may occur inside the PSA. So I'm in favor of keeping it in the toolkit, if you will.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Okay, Frank and Tim both have your hands still up. All right. Well, let me just rephrase the suggestion for a roll call based on the question that Paul put out, and it should be, and it is, should the conceptual place type map be used as an interim step and process benchmark to help guide consideration of potential refinements to the land use and the policy framework for the comp plan? So a yes means that this would stay in the packet. A no means that it would be set aside for now. Ms. Cook?
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Leverins?
Yes.
Mr. Haldeman?
No.
Mr. Polster?
No.
Dr. Rose? Not present. Ms. Knoll? Oh,
I think he's here.
I'm here, but I literally just joined the conversation, so I might abstain if I can.
Sure, no problem.
okay. Ms. Knoll? Not present. Mr. Koff?
No.
Ms. Wortman?
No.
There were 4 votes no and 2 votes yes.
Okay, so we're not tossing this out, but we're just sidelining it for the time being. Okay, thank you all. Mr. Holt, does it go back to you?
Yeah, no, yeah, thank you. I'm gonna do just a super quick transition. So that was the hard part. That was the hard part. Everybody can exhale now. I'm going to turn it over to Leanne. Leanne has a very more straightforward piece, again, with the idea about what we're going to be sharing with the board and taking forward are, I think, a lot more straightforward questions on vision and goals. And again, I think these will be a little bit easier to get through because we want to make sure we hit some of our abilities to look at these 2 chapters here in a minute. Leanne, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, and Alex, if it's okay, I'm going to take the screen back again for just a moment to share the few vision slides, and then I'll toggle back to you for the goals pieces. Will that work?
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes,
Great. Okay. Well, hopefully these slides will be familiar to you. As Paul mentioned, we went over these at your last PC working group meeting. And essentially, we wanted to talk with you about some different options for how we might start thinking about our approach for revising pieces of the plan framework. And the plan framework, again, is the vision, goals, strategies, and actions within the plan. So we're going to start with the vision piece. And here we go. As you recall, there was an analysis done to compare the 5 public input priorities that came out of the first round of engagement and how they are represented within the currently adopted plan's vision statement. And what that analysis revealed is that there's actually quite a lot of overlap. Those 5 priorities are identified multiple times within the current vision statement. And these are just some of the examples that you can see on the screen here of how those are expressed. And so we really just wanted to check in with you and think about how we want to move forward with the vision statement and the new 2045 comprehensive plan, and have a couple of different options for how we could move forward. I also wanted to recognize that Ms. Wortman had sent over an email and had a suggestion about the guiding principles being considered, or excuse me, the 5 public input priorities being considered to be used as guiding principles for the vision statement. And that can come in a couple of different forms, but I just wanted to mention that as well. So the alternatives in terms of how we could move forward with the vision statement for the new plan would be to first use the current 2035 vision statement, kind of leave it substantially the same. We could, so that's kind of our option 1. Option 2 would be to adjust this vision statement to make affordable housing direction more clear and to strengthen community character direction. And then the third option would be to reorganize the vision statement based on the 2045 public input priorities. And again, that idea of the guiding principles, the input priorities being used as guiding principles could be potentially considered as part of that idea. So I'll walk through those again. So the first one is leave the 2035 statement generally the same and carry it forward into 2045. Second would be to modify it to make affordable housing direction more clear and to strengthen community character direction. And the third would be to reorganize it using the public input priorities. And before we get into discussion, I do want to mention that this is just to kind of be able to share with the board what the direction is in terms of how we're heading with the vision statement, and also to give some direction to the project team in terms of how they might be revamping or not the vision statement. But you will definitely have many opportunities in the future to look more closely at the different words that are used and how this plays out. So this is just to give us a general direction on how to proceed. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. King. And well, I see Mr. Haldeman is the first one up. And you're muted, Jack.
Sorry.
Okay.
I think our vision statement's already written, and I think the 5 public input themes is the vision statement. We've all adopted it. We all accept the fact that it's a good distillation of residents' input to the plan. And I think that's our vision statement. I think our work is done.
And so you're essentially saying those 5 elements are, to use Ginny's words, the guiding principles.
No, not the guiding principles. It is the vision statement.
It is the vision statement.
All you have to do is write the word vision statement above the 5 themes, and we're done, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Anybody else? Ginny, do you have any follow-on to that? And I see Ms. Leverins has her hands up.
Typically, a vision statement is very short and comprehensive. I'm thinking that the public input priorities are, while they're still the 50,000 foot view, I think they may be a little bit more specific. So I'm more inclined to keep the 2035 vision statement and then append the public input priorities as they stand.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
As guiding principles. I like that idea.
Okay. Anybody else?
Oops, I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, that's all right, Ginny. We'll make an exception.
The one thing that when I look at the public input priorities, the one thing I don't see, maybe I've lost it, but specifically laid out is this notion of slowing the growth of the county. I mean, so many of the public input priorities are aimed at that. And I know that would be hard to put in a vision statement, but I don't know. I just put that on the table.
Okay.
That's a good point.
I'm sorry, Jenny, could you say that again? I missed the first part of your comment.
Sure. I'm struggling with the idea that so much of the public input priority was aimed at reducing the rate of growth in the county by various means. And I accept that would be not a nice thing to put in the vision statement, but I'm struggling with how to reflect that.
But I guess I would offer that, or I would ask, is that really our job to restrict growth? And by that, I mean, if I'm a landholder, and this is what we heard a lot through some of the rural lands conversations several years ago. These folks this is their retirement. This is their legacy for their kids. And so the question really for me is, if I'm a landholder and I choose not to farm my land anymore, and my alternative is to develop it, how do we get to deny that landholder that ability? So, we can certainly put restrictions on how he can do it, but I think our goal is to really sort of understand that, and if we're told it's going to be 120,000 in a few years, meaning 2045, so then we need to figure out if that's going to be the case, then how do we best, manage that to fit within the PSA or outside the PSA. So I am not one that's in favor of making it restrictive or saying that we are no growth. Clearly we're seeing a lot of growth and a lot of density happening just on our borders, which will have an impact on us just from a street perspective. So, from a traffic perspective. So, sorry, I didn't mean to get sideways, but
that's fine.
I don't think we should be promoting no growth as part of vision. It's really, where should it occur?
Okay. Mr. Polster?
First off, I'd like to stay with the 2035 vision statement. And as to Jenny's statement about how do we address that with the growth is, the fact of the matter is that we can't. But there are ways that we can manage growth. And I think the current 2035 comp plan talks about growth management strategies. And whether or not we're successful either with the land use map, which is another way to keep growth where you want it, or zoning ordinance type things, or those sort of decisions that we make on legislative, the fact of the matter is that we have the tools in place to be able to address the growth issues. And the biggest thing is the land use map. If we want to go back to the citizens and say, hey, in managing growth, not stopping growth, but managing growth, here's what we're proposing to you. Thank you.
Frank, can I get a clarification? When you say the 2035 vision statement, would that be with those two additional items of make affordable housing direction more clear and strengthen community
I'm good with that.
Okay.
I'm absolutely good with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's see. Tim, do you still have your hand up? Or
yeah, I just wanted to add that I'm with Frank, and if we could add the clarifying language for affordable housing and community character, I would support that as well. Thanks.
Okay, sure. Ms. Leverins, any further comment?
Yes, I'm anxious that we not get ourselves into a situation with unintended consequences. We have many tools that we can use to manage growth, and I wholeheartedly support what Frank was saying about managing versus stopping, because we are not able to stop growth because of the constraints placed on us by the state. So that if we institutionalize and incorporate slow growth, no growth into our vision statement or into the plan at all, we may find ourselves with a future planning commission and board of supervisors meeting with irate citizens pointing to the comprehensive plan, which says that we intend to do something we may not be able to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I do think managing versus stopping is a very critical distinction. Mr. Haldeman?
Yeah. Hi. I understand the state won't let us stop it, and probably shouldn't, even if it could. But if we pursue the concept that we've accepted in scenario 2 or some variation of scenario 2, which, as I understand it, is to reduce density in the rural lands and concentrate it within the PSA in walkable mixed-use districts located here and there, we are by definition going to impose land use changes on property holders. I don't see any other way to do it. And so I guess that's the one point. I'd like to go back to my idea of the vision statement, which is the 5 themes. And I mean, it doesn't say control growth. It's true, but the nature section speaks of protection of sensitive environment and preserve natural areas in their community. Residents place the highest value on the protection of nature. Under community character, the county's rural character is also highly valued, including rural communities like Toano. There's a preference for new development to occur within the established PSA and away from the rural lands outside the PSA. Affordable housing talks of residential growth should be balanced in a way that provides opportunity for all income levels, but it must also be balanced with the preservation of the county's unique community character, economic development. Well, that doesn't get into it so much, but quality of life does. So we're talking about, nobody in this vision statement is talking about stopping growth, but protecting ourselves from the impact of growth is embedded in these 5 themes. And also embedded in these 5 themes are the comments of over 1,000 county residents in the surveys and the assembly and so forth. And I just think it makes a marvelous vision statement. I really do. And you can just finish it, right below that. You can just say, you can have a mission statement attached to it. It just simply says, it'll be the goal of county government to legislate policies to implement these 5 or protect these 5 or protect the vision statement. And the goals would be directed towards protecting the vision statement, which I assume is part of the process that we're embarking on anyway. So anyway, that's my last gasp effort to have that become the vision statement.
Okay, Mr. Polster?
Jack's comment about the rural land and then moving density into the PSA, it is a strategy, which is one of the reasons why I objected to that. Another strategy is all the citizens' input. When we asked the question in the November session, was what would you do about, what would you suggest about the 1 house per 3 acres? Would you make it larger or whatever? And the public input came back and said make it 10, 15, but it was higher than the 3 acres for 1. Now, if that's something that citizens want to do, and that's an idea to help with this growth thing, then why didn't it show up here?
Meaning on the slide that's on the screen right now, Frank, or
no, in the 5 pieces that we were talking about,
gotcha.
Rural lands.
Okay.
Because the strategy there was to move it in by moving density in, as opposed to other strategies. Mm-hmm. So my point is there is a way for us in managing growth through the tools that we have to be able to take that to the board and say the consensus is let's raise the 3 acres on 1 house in the rural lands and stop the development out there. We could do that.
Mm-hmm. But to your point, I didn't hear citizens saying that.
Yeah, they did. In the survey that we did when we did the 5 different schools, when they had a place map there and it said for the rural lands, what would you want to put on there? So, get Vlad to go back and dump that out. But there was a lot of input that said, let's do 5, 10, 15 acres.
Okay. All right. Of course, that goes back to Tim's discussion, the point he was making earlier, and we won't hash that out now. But the fact that those sorts of decisions have a significant impact on land values too.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Good point, though. Good point. Ginny, did you have another comment? No.
Yes. It's a question to the group. I'm wondering if we prefer to keep the 2035 vision statement, does that reflect badly, or does it say we weren't amending that vision statement for the ideas that we heard? It bothers me. Adopting the 5 things as the vision statement may not be exactly the right thing. I don't know, but I equally worry about changing nothing. Because it strikes me that people would say, "Oh, well, they asked us what we wanted, and then they didn't reflect it in the vision statement."
Yeah, no, I share that concern as well. And actually, I'm me personally leaning to sort of a hybrid of revising it and adjusting the language. And I think, there's 3 questions out there. And so I'm going to start us voting on a particular question that I think incorporates what I've been hearing from the group, as well as Jack's points, realizing that, as Leanne said, that, this is just guidelines as to what direction they're going to go to create a draft vision statement, and they just want to know where we're leaning. And so, to me, that option that says reorganize vision statement based on 2045 public input priorities encompasses everything. It encompasses giving them more affordable housing direction, make that more clear. It encompasses strengthening community character protection that everybody seemed to think was needed. And then as this draft vision statement is worked out, we can see whether, to Jack's point, incorporating those 5 themes in there would be helpful as well. So why don't I start with that? And if there's not enough support for that approach, we'll just go down the list for the other 2 questions. But right now, go ahead.
Rich,
Yes.
if I could just make a quick comment.
Sure,
let's keep in mind, when we talked about the goals in one of our last meetings, we noted that the public generally, with pretty much an overwhelming support the goals as they stand. So we might be able to take the leap that they would also support the vision statement as it stands. So I'm inclined to absolutely tweak it to show that we paid attention and incorporate the most important, or the key public input priorities, but not necessarily revise it wholesale because of that.
Okay.
So thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I would bet a lot of money that nobody that we've talked to so far, no input, has read the county vision statement.
That could very well be true. Yeah. Well, why don't I start with the first question, and if that doesn't receive a majority, we'll go down to the second, being to keep the 2035 statement and just make a couple tweaks to it. So the first question is to reorganize the vision statement based on the 2045 public input priorities. Ms. Cook, would you want to call the roll for that?
Certainly. Mr. O'Connor?
No.
Ms. Lebrins?
Yes.
Mr. Haldeman?
Yes.
Well, hold on. What's
Mr.
the vote?
Coulter?
What's the vote?
The question is to organize the vision statement based on 2045 public input priorities. And so what that would do is...
No.
Okay.
Dr. Rose,
Yes.
Mr. Cross,
Yes.
Ms. Wortman,
Yes.
that is 5 yeses and 2 nos.
Okay. All right, thank you. And again, this is just some directions for the planning team and the consultant team to go back and start crafting a draft, emphasis on draft. And if we don't like the first version, we certainly can go back and come up with another hybrid if necessary. So thank you all for your vote. And I will turn it back over to the planning and consultant team.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're going to move now from the vision statement to the goals, and then we'll also talk a little bit about strategies, actions, not at a detailed level, but at kind of a conceptual level. So Alex, if you could go to the next slide. You might recall that there are 9 current goals in the existing 2035 comprehensive plan, and we elicited input from your fellow residents, the folks that live in James City County, to get their reactions to those 9 goals and whether or not they should be maintained in the updated plan or whether they should be modified. And your community participation team has spent a lot of great effort looking at all of those responses and coming up with some really great themes to help guide and help us understand what the reactions to the current plan goals are. One thing I do want to recognize, and someone mentioned this just recently, just a few minutes ago, is that there was pretty strong support for the current comprehensive plan goals. It varies, and actually if you go to the next slide, we've got the point here, there's varying level of support for maintaining those goals. However, more than 50%, I believe 55% is the lowest support for maintaining the goal that any of the 9 goals have. I think the highest was 85%. So again, it's varying, but there is the majority in all cases support at least maintaining the goal. One thing that we talked about with the community participation team at the last meeting, as we were looking at the responses from folks that wanted to tweak the goals, we talked about the fact that we can't just assume that because someone said that they want to maintain the goal as is, that they wouldn't necessarily support revising goals to add a little more clarity or specificity. We didn't specifically ask that question. And so, there'll be an opportunity for the public to look at these goals again and to give their responses. So anyway, we just wanted to, make that point that just because there's strong support for maintaining, that doesn't necessarily mean that those same folks wouldn't appreciate or be open to some points of clarification within those goals. So related to the goals, we wanted to get some direction from you all, from the PC working group, on how we should move forward with the goals. And so there are 2 options there. The first is to continue to use the 9 goals, pretty much the same as they are within the currently adopted 2035 plan, and really focus on refining the strategies and actions as part of the update process. So that's the option 1. And then option 2 is to modify 1 or more of the goals, so actually making changes to those goals, and also refine the strategies and actions as the update process continues. So I will hand it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Leanne. And I'll open it up for discussion. All right, Ms. Workman.
Yes, I sent an email that had two thoughts, and I recognize that I am absolutely, positively the newest person to be looking at this material. So I may be, my thoughts may not be well formulated, but here they are. I looked at the population needs goal and the underlying strategies and actions. And it occurred to me that those could, I think almost all of them could be placed in other goal areas because they were all, for the most part, calling out specific populations to make certain that those populations' needs were met, but that the needs fell into other goal areas. The second idea, which is even more radical, is that I tend to think of the goals as what and land use as how. And so I didn't know whether there was any taste for considering that the land use goals were really tools to implement the what of the other goals. And with that, I will mute myself.
All right, thank you. Further discussion? And again, the question is, both of the questions involve refining the strategies and actions as this update continues. But the question is, do we use the 9 goals, keep them substantially the same that are within the 2035 comp plan, or modify one or more of the goals? But both of those questions involve refining strategies and actions as the process continues. Further discussion? Mr. Haldeman, thank you.
Hi. I think a couple of these goals could benefit by a tweak or two, nothing radical and nothing to change the meaning, except for economic development. I ran across the goal of the EDA, the Economic Development Authority, and it's significantly different than the county's economic development goal, and different, and I think much better. But whether you think it's better or not, I think they should be the same. I mean, why would the county's economic development goal be different from the goal of its EDA? So anyway, that's.
I'm sorry, I don't. I'm not familiar with the EDA goal. Jack, could you very briefly just contrast the two?
Sure. Well, the county's goal is, quote, build a diverse, balanced local economy that supports the basic needs of all segments of the community and contributes positively to the quality of life, close quote. I frankly don't think that says much. But
right.
Anyway, the EDA is as follows, quote, foster the development and expansion of a diversified and healthy base of primary business, industry that will better balance the tax base, increase job opportunities, and enhance both the quality and standard of living in James City County, close quote.
Okay.
To that, I would add, it says job opportunities, I would put in well-paying job opportunities. I think that's an important thing. But anyway, that's, whichever one you like, they ought to be the same, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I do like the EDA goal. It's very straightforward, very specific. So thank you for catching that. Mr. Polster.
First off, I agree with Jack on the ED piece. And it's not necessarily true that the strategies and actions wouldn't meet that new EDA goal. But like a lot of our goals, and it goes back to Mrs. Wortman's comment earlier on about citizen input, is having a goal and a strategy and an action, and having it lead to a reduction in the gap analysis is the issue. That when we review these strategies and actions, are they going to close those? Or are there policy issues associated with those strategies and actions that we need to implement to be able to close those gaps? And so the comp plan in that way and closing those gaps from the citizen inputs that we've seen, we need to be thinking about what are those other tools that are going to help to close it outside of what's in the strategy and action. And there's plenty of those in the ED pieces and some other things. Back to the issue that Jenny brought up on the population needs is I personally want to see us keep all the goals the way they are, as well as the strategies and actions. And specifically on the population needs, I think there's a real need for us to relook at this one and think about diversity and placemaking for the next 45 years. And even though this calls out specific demographic portions of our community, I'm not so sure that we're encompassing the diversity of the community in these goals, strategies, and actions. That's it.
And that was the community needs area that you were talking, Frank?
No, it's the population needs.
Population needs.
Right.
Okay. Yep. So far I'm hearing.
Just to follow through on that,
sure.
Is it's true for every one of our goals that there are overlapping supportive pieces within other goals.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whether it's parks and recreation on trying to do something on a ecotourism piece, there's an equal portion that's in economic development that's also part of the land use thing. So, I mean, these things overlap through all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not surprised that Jenny discovered that.
Yeah. And I think you brought up you made a very good point that's been out there, but I think it's helpful to stress, and that is that our strategies and actions really need to be looking at that gap analysis too, to addressing those disparities. And thank you for reminding us about that as well. So good point. Ms. Leverins.
Yes, thank you. I also was looking for ways that we could consolidate and perhaps not have 9 goals, but I think it's important for us to highlight the population needs as opposed to having to go look in each of the other goals for the strategies and actions that would address those needs. So I think we ought to keep all 9 of them.
Okay.
I'm also thinking that land use, while the goal of land use is, yes, to implement the other, the larger vision statement, but all of the strategies and actions are also the how, and the what is the goal, and the strategies and actions are the how. So I'm not sure it's really appropriate for us to give the land use plan any kind of a separate designation there. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, the 2 questions that were on the table was to continue to use the 9 goals from the 2035 plan, or modify 1 or more of the goals, and in both cases refine strategies and actions. And what I heard is that the economic development area probably could use another look-see that goal, and the population needs as an extra review. And so what I'll do then is put for a vote the first question, a yes or no, to modify 1 or more of the goals in the 2035 plan and refine strategies and actions as the update process continues. So that's the question on the table. And Ms. Cook, would you call the roll?
Mr. O'Connor?
Yes.
Ms. Leverins?
Yes.
Mr. Haldeman?
Yes.
Mr. Polster?
Aye.
Dr. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Cross?
Aye.
Ms. Wortman?
Yes.
All votes yes.
Okay, thank you all.
Hooray! Everybody agreed.
See, we're working together very well. I'll turn it back over to the planning team.
Great. Okay. So we're going to pick back up and talk a little bit about the policy direction within the strategies and actions. So as you can see on the screen here, we did go back and take a look at the current adopted comprehensive plan and looked at that through the lens of the public engagement outcomes we've received to date. And there's a strong correlation. I think Mr. Polster mentioned that previously. There are some opportunities to maybe enhance or better achieve public priorities that have been identified through this process. And so we went through and reviewed kind of the list of items that you see at the bottom of the screen here. And we've come up on the next.
We can't see your slide.
Oh, you can't see the slide? This is Alex is sharing, I believe. Let's see, can other people see the 2035 GSA impressions and ideas slide?
I see it.
Yes, yep.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Mr.
the bottom
Polster.
is the resources reviewed, correct?
Right,
Okay,
right.
I was only seeing half of something.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Is it coming up now?
Yes.
Okay. So we reviewed all these sources and put together a list based on each of the 9 chapters for ideas for you all to consider in terms of different areas that you might want to explore the policy direction. So essentially what I'm going to be doing is walking through each of the 9 chapters and quickly touching on the kind of, some of these are new ideas, some of these are maybe kind of building on ideas that are already in the plan, but maybe strengthening or enhancing or changing in some way. But these are kind of new things that aren't in the current plan. And the question really here, again, similar to the vision and goals question, is, are you comfortable with us, the project team, moving forward with this list? And are you also comfortable with taking this list to the Board of Supervisors meeting on October 27th to say that these are some of the items that the project team will be exploring as they draft the plan? And of course, you all will get to see those drafts and be able to provide direct comment on those as those drafts become available. So I'm going to, given the time that we've got and a couple more agenda items, I'm going to try to move through these fairly quickly. You may want to just kind of take notes, and then at the end, as I walk through the 9, if there's some particular things that you either would prefer not to see on the list for each of the 9 goal chapters, or if there's something you didn't see that you would like to see, maybe we could hold those comments till the discussion at the end. Okay, next slide. All right, so we're going to start off here with the environment, and these slides are organized the same. So on the left-hand side, it's just a reminder of what we heard from the public in terms of the overall response to the goal for that chapter. And some, again, looking at those different documents that I shared on the previous slide, some policy ideas for consideration. And we've broken these up between what we heard from the public and some additional considerations just from a kind of a planning expertise standpoint that we wanted to make sure you all were given the chance to consider. So public input ideas for the environment are reduction of development potential outside of the primary services area and adjacent to critical natural features, providing compact development options within the primary service area to limit the development footprint, use mixing as a strategy that cuts down vehicle miles traveled and helps reduce emissions. And when we say use mixing, we mean mixing of land uses within an area. Stronger tree canopy protection, limiting irrigation to conserve water supply, mitigating flood impacts in land use decisions. And then some additional considerations beyond what we receive from the public inputs include a state code requirement for strategies to combat projected sea level rise and recurrent flooding, low impact development and green building standards, and further protection of natural and water resources. Next slide. We'll have discussion about that here in just a moment. Okay. Land use, same setup here. So from the public inputs, some of the ideas for your consideration are reduce development potential outside the primary services area to protect rural character, support a greater mix of uses within or adjacent to existing and new neighborhoods, consider reductions to the primary services area to protect natural areas and rural character within the primary services area today, stronger protections for rural working lands from encroachment by new development. And by rural working lands, we mean, any kind of agricultural or natural working land environment. Allow rural scale non-residential uses in rural communities, and encourage and promote redevelopment in targeted areas, which are listed there. Additional considerations include use of analysis models to inform development approval decisions. Those are the analysis models that are the leave behinds that are being developed as part of this process. And then incorporating the place type framework from the scenarios. So using that as part of the land use guidance on the land use plan map. Okay, next slide. Community character from public inputs. Ideas for consideration include limiting new development to the primary service area to protect rural character, updating design guidance for rural development to reflect high importance of rural character, and expanding the PDR, the Purchase of Development Rights Program / Open Space Program, to protect rural and sensitive areas. Some additional considerations, and these could also be kind of grouped together under kind of character design guidelines. First bullet, they're incorporating new character design guidelines into development review process. And related to that, updating guidance for infill and redevelopment to address transitions between existing and new developments, and creating development standards for higher intensity developments to better reflect desired community character. Next slide. Economic development from the public inputs. Policy ideas for consideration are economic development efforts to focus on higher paying jobs and industries. Additional considerations include responding to job market trends and providing use patterns that create amenity-rich, complete communities and provide employment options in walkable environments. Stronger focus on targeted industries and land use service needs, such as focusing on those in the economic opportunity areas. Reducing regulatory hurdles and creating clear expectations for developing new businesses and targeted industries. Ensuring land use requirements are flexible to changing market trends, such as retail and office, and ensuring viability of new ag economy. Next slide. For housing, from the public inputs, policy and ideas for consideration are encouraging / requiring diversity of housing in new developments, land use policies or funding mechanisms to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. And by that, what we mean is the market naturally provides it. It's not something that's necessarily deed restricted. And clarifying targets for local housing market, the types of housing products and households that we're targeting the housing for. Additional considerations include incorporation of the 2019 Workforce Housing Task Force recommendations. Those 4 key areas are preservation, production, access, and funding. Prioritizing affordable housing near transit and employment centers. Strengthening the policy tie between affordable housing and growing supporting the local workforce. And I think that the intention there is just to kind of tie it back to this Workforce Housing Task Force recommendations, and that affordable housing is intended to be supporting the local workforce. And then finally, adding new strategies, actions with intent to increase affordable housing stock. Next slide. For transportation, from the public inputs, we have a couple of ideas for consideration: greater connectivity within the primary services area to reduce travel times and congestion, and focusing on constructing new facilities for walking and biking, both for recreation and for travel. Some additional considerations include focusing transit services to those with the greatest needs, working with VDOT, Virginia Department of Transportation, to implement more multimodal and complete streets improvements on the network, pursuing funding to expand, complete the trail network, encouraging cross-parcel connectivity to improve safety, and encouraging mixed use to encourage shorter travel times and reduce congestion. Next slide. Parks and recreation, from the public inputs, ideas include expanding walkable environments, greenway networks, and waterways as new development occurs, better access for all through geographic dispersion of facilities, addressing the importance of rec facilities at public schools and supporting their needs, more public access to waterways for swimming, boating, and fishing. And additional considerations include provide new pocket parks and community-focused parkland that serves those in walkable or bikeable distance, connect to the quality of life policy theme and supporting economic development, and then maintain, expand, and improve the existing park system. Next slide. Public facilities. So policy ideas for consideration include considering from the public inputs include considering methods for new development to mitigate impacts to public infrastructure, sustainability practices for James City County as a government, such as government fleets, buildings, and energy use, expanding high-speed internet technology, and library facility enhancements. Additional considerations include identifying new facility needs to maintain level of service based on new growth projections. And that could say based on future growth projections, whatever those are going to be that we work with in this plan. Development of service and facility master plan, which is a strategic planning item in the current 2035 strategic plan. And incorporate fiscal impact modeling into development reviews and facility planning in the county. And then last slide is population needs. And from public inputs, we have addressed needs of people with physical and mental disabilities, more focus on working age cohorts and supporting their needs, addressing food insecurity of lower income households, and increasing support for services that support persons suffering from homelessness. And with that, I will stop there and happy to answer any questions. And Mr. Chairman, if you want to take the lead on the discussion.
Thanks, Leanne. Ms. Leverance.
Yes, thank you. I recall in a meeting we had last year sometime that we talked about a Fort Eustis military overlay. Where would that fit? And is this the place to bring that up?
The overlay district is in the Skiffs Creek area where you have their Felker Airport entry over that area that we share with them in the Skiffs Creek area of the county.
Right. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that because that is something that we talked about including in the next comprehensive plan.
I don't think there's an issue with that, but the staff will go back. There's 2 mining operations down there at the very edge, and they're not in the flight path, and there's no reason for us to think there's going to be any development in that area if it stays the way we're talking about in our current comp plan and land use.
And Mr. Holt, I think you... Go ahead.
I did. I was going to confirm, Ms. Leverance. Yes, we have that on our work plan, and those elements we'll be bringing forward. Probably in land use, but it might be in some other places, but we've got that on our to-do.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Rose?
Hi, yes. I'm wondering what type of feedback you want here. Are you asking for additional policy ideas? Because I have one on the environment section, and then I have just a general question.
Sure, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, so in terms of policy ideas, if you can go back to the environmental slide, the first slide. Is that possible? Right, so one thing that's missing, I like that there's an emphasis on development and green building standards, but I'm wondering if an additional consideration could be for renewable energy infrastructure, whether it's solar farms or even electric car charging stations. Might be something that could be considered and will be important in the coming years.
Okay.
And then I have a question about the makeup of the public input. If you understand or know who was responding to this when you got public input, because I'm struck by this idea of rural character coming up pretty regularly. And I think sometimes people like myself who've never lived in a rural area have a very romantic vision of what that actually means. And I'm wondering if you had people who are living and working in these rural areas speak to this idea of rural character and maintaining rural character. And I think it goes back to a comment earlier, I think by Mr. O'Connor, about that idea that people who live and work on farms, often their retirement is built into the land that they have and the ability to sell that land for development. And so I think it's coming back again here when we keep seeing this idea of rural character, and whose idea of rural character is it?
Okay, good questions.
Yeah. Would you like me to respond to that?
Yes, please. I was
Sure. Sure. So one of the things that we're doing with, as part of the community participation team work is trying to look at the collective inputs that we've received during this process. And one of those is the 2019 Citizen Survey, which is a statistically significant survey, with randomly selected respondents. And that idea of kind of rural character preservation was something that really started first with that survey and then was confirmed in the first round of engagement and then again here recently in the second round of engagement. Good question about, what one person thinks of in terms of rural when what they envision in their mind may not be the same as another person's idea of rural. And I think some of that is really going to come out in the land use classifications that are used and where they're used, and some of the other policy guidance that's there. But I would say, generally speaking, this idea of rural character protection is something that has been supported throughout the process. We've been collecting inputs.
Does that answer your question, Rob?
Sort of, but you've collected input throughout the process, but does that input reflect the opinions across a broad spectrum of people who live in the county? I mean, people who respond to these types of surveys, I'm guessing, are people that are more like me, who might be more engaged in the development of the community. I don't quite know how to describe what I'm trying to ask, but
sure.
Do you have farmers and people living in these rural areas responding when you ask for community input?
That's a really great question. I think that was part of the reason why the process, even before the process started, the citizen survey was conducted. So there could be a guide that was statistically significant of the county's, the representation of the residents to guide us in this effort. We can use that to kind of refer back to and say, does this sound right, what we're getting from the public input? And, that was something that was supported within the citizen survey.
Right, thank you.
Okay. Mr. O'Connor.
Thanks. Hey, Leanne, when we were reviewing some of this input on the CPT, there were quite a few comments about education, schools, and the like. Have we captured that in anything that you're proposing? And I think in the 2035 comp plan, we probably focus quite a bit on facilities, what makes up a school in terms of urgent size and the like. I really think an important component of population needs and economic development is, it goes beyond the boundaries of facilities and more into the quality of education. And I understand our tasking is not so much quality and the how the education is delivered, but I certainly think it would be an important goal to include for economic development in order to recruit businesses to locate. We need to have a strong education program. I feel like it's missing in what we've reviewed today.
I greatly appreciate you bringing that up, and I'm sorry that I failed to do that, so thank you. Part of the challenge here is this material had to be in the packet before we had our most recent CPT meeting, and that was one of the topics we discussed at that meeting. So that's the reason you're not seeing it within here. But that's definitely something as we move to taking this to the board and at your joint meeting with the board on the 27th, we can definitely add that in there. I think that's a good addition if
Great.
Others support it.
Thank you.
Yeah, great catch, Tim. Thank you. Mr. Polster, then Mr. Haldeman.
First off, Leanne, really, I wish I would have seen this earlier. This is superb. You've done a great job in capturing a bunch of the ideas and concerns that I've had in every one of these things. And what a great job you've done of synthesizing these things and putting together. I do have some specific comments, if I can, on each of the slides. And I'd like to start off with the environment piece. And one of the things that I think this comment pertains to all of these slides that you've got here is that we have, in the past, the staff has done a great job in putting specific studies together to address the issues that are in these slides, but it's the execution that's fallen straight. And so, just to pick up on Rob's comment about how do the farmers feel, and Rich, you can confirm that, less than 3 or 4 years ago, there was something called the RDEC, which asked the rural community what they wanted to see for the development with some very, very specific things. And so that study has some pieces that pertain specifically not only this to the environment, but to some of the land use issues that they had in there. So I'd like to be able to see a place where these studies, whether it's the bicycle master plan, the green space or greenway plan, or any of these things, put together so that when we come back in the strategies and actions to compare it, we can take a look at, for example, the Parks and Recreation's master plan against their shoreline, and to see if, in fact, we are reducing the gap by executing against these things that are in the comp plan, but actually have plans that, for financial reasons or priorities or whatever, that we haven't acted on. Second thing on the environment piece, I agree with Rob. We ought to have something in here that gets the environment and the solar farm thing. And I would like to suggest, not only for the environment, but the public facility piece, that the county implement and relook at its lead strategies and actions, LEED, it's the building code to get more efficient, and actually look at the idea of the county becoming carbon free in its facilities by 2045, which does something both for the environment and for the public facilities piece. On the environment piece, what I don't see here is something that I suggested back a number of months that Paul, I think, has given to the staff, to to Tony Small's group, is watershed zoning, to be able to protect the rural areas and the development that happens in the PSA that washes down into those sensitive rural areas. I'd like to see that added to that list, and I'm sure Paul has already got the staff working on that piece for it. Can I see the next slide? You know, this whole idea of taking density within the PSA and moving it to some other area is not necessarily a bad idea. But if you pitch to the staff in those regards, I'd like you to be at least make sure that they know that they may have a zoning policy issue that they may have to pay in order to enable that issue for it. And that applies to a bunch of things that we're talking about in terms of what are the by right pieces that we have. So when we talk about the land use and growth, one of the things that I've tried to make a point about is if we did nothing in the land use map and we stayed where we are, we already have 80% of the capacity to meet the 2045 population, which may or may not be there within the PSA. So the idea of taking things out of the PSA, which you suggested, which was kind of a no-brainer since the Stonehouse Reserve and the riverfront pieces have an easement that they can't do anything with it, but also bringing more than just the Hill Pleasant farm out. So why you kept those other two segments in there, I'm not sure. So taking things out of the PSA or the potential of being in the PSA, which is what that EO was about, should be discussed, especially in the light of the economic development section, which says, hey, you got to take advantage of these places. So what's the trade-off on that if you do or don't, as well as all the traffic things? Can I see the next slide? When we talk about community character, one of the things that I've picked up from both Tim and from Jack is the rural character of this community is inside the PSA as well as outside of the PSA. So when we start increasing densities in some of the areas that we're discussing, we in fact destroy that rural character that exists within the PSA, and specifically from Croker Road to the Tohanna. And if we want to develop the Tohanna area the way it's been suggested, making some of those changes takes away that rural character that we've been talking about. So for me, it takes place in both areas of the county, and we need to be thinking about that because most of us, like Rob, live within the PSA and haven't got a clue what's going on the other side. When we talk about preserving and expanding the PDR, I know one of the deliverables that you have here is to talk about that and where that happens. And I want to suggest that one of the things that would be very helpful is to talk about where in the rural area of the county we ought to preserve, as opposed to protecting somebody's inheritance if we're going to spend money. And I think Mr. Connors has brought that up about the Bush Farm property and why we even did that before on that. Next slide. You know, I don't think that there's anything wrong with some of the strategies and actions that we have in there, but we somehow or another can't get the ball across the 20-yard line to bring those things to us. And so I am really interested in trying to find out what we can do besides putting these strategies and actions in the comp plan to do that. The Hazelwood Farm is a perfect example that I raised the point on, that we're in the middle of trying to do something. Are we really reaching out within the state of Virginia's program to be able to elevate that property on the governor's list at a 5 as opposed to a 3-2? And maybe what we need to do is incentivize, which we're allowed to do within the economic development as a strategy and action, which is to put the infrastructure associated with water and sewer and move it from the Stone House up to the Hazelwood property. And that's what I'm talking about, what I mean when I'm talking about what is it that we need to do to execute those ideas inside of the PSA, like the EO. Next slide. Here's one of my nice things. I really like, in about 2 or 3 different ways, the way you've identified some land that could be for affordable housing. How it gets to be affordable housing to the AMI piece, I'm not sure. But the one piece that you picked out was right across from the Long Hill Rec Center. One parcel of it is already R5, the others aren't. It's near 2 WADA stations right across the rec center and down next to another affordable housing place. It's down the street from a pharmacy and a grocery store. It has all the elements of what the Housing Task Force strategy said that we needed for a location. I think that kind of a look and finding the right locations where the community would accept it is one of the things that's a tough piece, so that the land use and then the execution to be able to get to that AMI level, that's tough. Next slide. The transportation piece is one that I don't get because of the way we're all spread out. And so I'm back to the connectivity thing and what we're doing to be able to allow folks to be able to, if they want, on a bicycle to move from Newtown into the Williamsburg, or for an ecotourism, how you can move the capital trail and attach that into the Williamsburg area or into some of these other rural areas. And that's why I've asked for the bicycle plan, master plan, so that we can actually look at some of the suggestions that are there. And the new plan that just ended up getting executed at $1.3 million connected Newtown with the Moortown city of Williamsburg. What other things do we need to do when we look at transportations that gets to the connectivity pieces? for. Next slide. Parks and Recreation, we have a great program, absolute great. They have a great master plan. They have a great water plan. But we're not connecting it with ecotourism. So one of the things that I've suggested in the comments that I have is to take the study out of the Lower Chickahominy, which places the area that we have within the county as probably one of the most pristine areas on the eastern coast. And yet it also came out with the idea that for every dollar in conservation, $1, the county would get back $1.53. So how do we take economic development and the park and recreation things that they're doing, and how do we get that done as an alternative to what we're going to be experiencing with this COVID-19 things for the next 6 years? How do we continue to support those pieces of our economy that are based on the tourism? And I believe that that's another way to do that. Next slide. I already talked about the public facility things. We ought to be able to look at every piece of the other 8 folks and say, where is it that we need to add the carbon-free by 2045 into all of our facilities in the county, which could be in the parks and recs, could be in the schools, could be in our own facilities for it. I think that's the last one, isn't it?
Population's the last.
Well, I've already talked to you about the diversity thing. I don't think we're even getting anywhere close to that. I mean, those are great. I mean, the homeless piece. Are you kidding me? Look at the number. I mean, I drive out at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning on Richmond Road, and what do I see? A bunch of parents out there at the motels putting their kids on the bus. I mean, the Bright Beginnings program is a perfect example. We're not funding for the capacity of the Bright Beginnings schools children with their 1 to 4. We're not. And so why aren't we doing something to meet those population needs? It goes back to Tim's point about what are we doing in the schools? We're not doing anything about it. Okay, I'm off my soapbox. Leanne, you did a great job. I'd like to see a copy of these because they were extremely thought-provoking when you put them together.
Thank you. I can't take full credit. It was definitely a group effort.
Okay. We still had a couple more questions. Mr. Haldeman and then Ms. Workman.
Rich, I submitted mine this afternoon. I just sent them around to everybody. The meeting's getting a little long in the tooth. Do you want to just let it go at that, or do you want me to read them?
Sure. What I'm thinking for everybody's edification is that we will not address the 2 chapters on our agenda for tonight, economic development and Parks and Rec. We'll defer that to the next meeting. So if you wanted to go through yours, Jack, or
okay. I'm happy to do it. I just tried to save everybody's time.
Yeah,
but,
sure.
Would you please start with environment? Mitigate flooding impacts and land use decisions. I was wondering, do we want to mitigate impacts of flooding or prevent the event to begin with? What should our focus be? Wait for the flooding to happen and then mitigate the impacts, or to work towards preventing flooding or keeping people out of the way of floods?
Jack, we know where the flooding is going to occur. We need to do it and fix it.
Okay. That's just a question. Oh boy, papers everywhere here. Sorry. Under economic development. Oh, excuse me. Still under environment. There's discussion in our current comprehensive plan about prohibiting shoreline erosion control structures. I don't know that we have ordinances about that, but I just wonder if that's something we should look at. They apparently cause more erosion than they prevent, or they push it on to other areas. Economic development. Oh, I made the point to staff, and I think they're going to address this. I had an exchange with Tom Weissung earlier about they've left the connection between the area's high quality of life and rural and historic ambience to economic development. That kind of connection is enshrined in just about every policy, certainly in our comprehensive plan. It's in the Business Climate Task Force. It's in the housing study. It's in the workforce housing study. And it should be a focus of this, I think. I hope we don't lose that. Under housing, do we need a new housing opportunities policy? You recall during the proffer scandal of 3 or 4 years ago, we eliminated the housing opportunities policy. I wonder if we should try to get it back. Under transportation, and this also goes into other areas, encourage mixed use to encourage shorter travel times and reduce congestion. There's 2 parts to mixed use as I understand it, and that the first part, of course, is to have a condensed, walkable, bikeable area with a wide range of housing and shops and grocery and entertainment, restaurants, and so forth, all in one type group, and that's to prevent or to propose or to provide an alternative to sprawl. The problem with the way we've done it in Newtown is you got them both. You got the tightly condensed mixed use area in Newtown, and you got the sprawl, so completely surrounding it all the way out to where I live in Governor's Land and Ford's Colony and Powhatan Settlement and so forth, all the way down Long Hill Road. I'd like to make the point that if we do encourage mixed use, at the same time, you have to provide open space around it, or otherwise you defeat the purpose of what I understand the purpose of mixed use. Under Parks and Recreation, better access for all through geographic dispersion of facilities. That came out in our committee meetings, subcommittee meetings, but specifically in the southeast part of the county. If you look at the maps in the Parks and Rec, whether you're talking about trails or parks or anything, there's almost nothing short of nothing outside of College Creek. It's all north and west of College Creek. So I'd like to include that. Where it says maintain and expand and improve existing park system, one Parks and Rec goal, which GSA 2.5, that I think is still worth pursuing, is to work with the National Park Service to open Green Springs Plantation and connect Centerville and John Tyler Highway with a multi-use trail. I think I'd love to see that. Under public facilities, I'd like to emphasize that we shouldn't have any more public facilities outside the PSA. The ones we have now are very poorly considered, and I hope we don't make that mistake again. And then should we identify land for new schools? We're going to need at least 2 more schools, and if we get to 120,000 people, we're going to need 10 more schools. Where are you going to put them? Is it too early to start looking at that? Then overall, my overall comment is just about every one of these slides has moving land use around, whether it's less density in the outside the PSA or creating mixed use over here or whatever. And going back to Mr. O'Connor's concern about taking people's retirement resources and so forth and so on, and he's absolutely right. But how are we going to do all of this without changing the land use map and the zoning ordinance and the zoning map? I just don't know how you do it. So that's it. That's it for me.
Thank you, Jack. Ms. Wortman?
You'll be happy to know I have one very simple question, which is right there on the public facilities slide, the first bullet. I don't have a clue of what that means. I'm sorry.
So that's a general kind of reference to what kind of opportunities are there to look at the private sector that develops different communities and businesses within James City County to be part of the solution in providing public infrastructure to serve those areas.
So you're kind of talking about public-private partnerships?
It could be, it could be something along the lines of proffers. I mean, there are many different ways that you could do that, but it's looking at ways for kind of a shared investment, if you will, in terms of public infrastructure to serve new development.
To my way of thinking, the phrase mitigate impacts doesn't convey that. So maybe you could look for some other words, shared investment that you just said, or gets me a much better understanding of what you're talking about.
Gotcha. Will do.
All right, thank you, Jenny. Leanne, does that pretty much, I know the question out there was essentially, are these listed, should these listed items be included as new components for the strategies and actions? And my sense is that from the discussion that the answer is absolutely yes, so that we don't necessarily need to vote on that. But I'm wondering, does that answer does this discussion give you the feedback you needed to proceed?
Yes. Yeah. So I think you all have been very helpful in helping us refine some of the bullet points and also adding some additional ones that weren't included. So I think that's really helpful. And I guess maybe the question is everyone comfortable with us carrying these forward with the adjustments discussed on the call today to take these lists to the meeting on the 27th, understanding that, again, this is just to open discussion and to provide the project team with some direction on what to explore in drafting the strategies and actions. This is not, a final say in any respect.
Okay, so, since we've been doing this all along in the meeting, the question is everyone comfortable carrying these items forward as we go to the board meeting and incorporate them into the comprehensive plan as we work through that? Ms. Cook, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. O'Connor? Mr. O'Connor?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was pulled away for a second, so I'm good how we're moving forward. Yes.
Okay. Ms. Leverins?
Yes.
Mr. Haldeman?
Yes.
Mr. Colster?
Aye.
Dr. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Kropp?
Yes.
Ms. Wortman?
Yes.
There's all yeses.
Okay, thank you. Next, Mr. Gavrilovic will present some slides on schedules and next steps. Lad?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2-3 slides. Very good substantive discussion today that will allow us, I think, to move forward with the packet for the joint meeting. As you see on there, one of the reasons we want to get through that today is because of the initial packet deadline for that October 27th meeting. I think the final deadline for revisions is October 14th, but either way, that's before your next meeting, which is the 19th. And what you'll get on the 19th is the final report on the public input that the CPT has been working on, and hopefully get to some of these chapter updates that have been waiting in the wings. And then the sum total kind of what we want to present in the October 27th joint meeting is all the public input, the basics of the preferred scenario, and then these policy considerations that you've been discussing today, along with just a look at the land use applications, no recommendations on them. Next slide. So considerations for this meeting, I think mission accomplished on the first bullet, which is affirmation of materials for the joint meeting in terms of what we present or don't present on the preferred scenario framework and the policy considerations as revised, amended through your discussion today. And then this second bullet is something that is probably better to discuss on your October 19th meeting. But based on kind of how we've been working through this today and how you've worked through it with staff, is this an appropriate way to proceed? How much hands-on versus guidance and oversight? And does it vary by chapter? So for example, can the planning team present the draft concepts for your consideration as they did today, get your discussion on it, any changes, and then this kind of straw vote just to make sure that we have general affirmation to move forward. And then the last bullet was, I don't think we need an affirmation, but just to take a look at the general sequence of meetings, which is on the next slide if you want to go there. And you can, certainly discuss this at the next meeting too. So the big benchmarks at the very top where we are today is the decision points on the preferred scenario framework and the policy considerations. And then those are carried forward to the joint meeting on October 27th. You'll see your next meeting, October 19th, is the public input and the chapter material reviews. And right before that, on October 12th, the CPT finalizes that public input summary. So we'll be presenting that to you. Then after the joint meeting on October 27th, we go right into talking about the next round of engagement, which will be happening in December. So the CPT will be discussing that while you all are looking at chapter materials and reviews. And then we'll be formulating the draft surveys for the next round of engagement with the CPT. Your meeting on the 23rd will, I think, have an update of that draft surveys and round 3 engagement, but it will also be the time to look at the future land use map. So all the input from the preferred scenario will start to filter into a refined future land use map for your discussion on the 23rd of November. Then November 30th, the dry run of the engagement. You have more material reviews on the December 7th, and then December 14th is kind of that next online summit, probably similar to what we did last time, but stay tuned on that. So that's kind of the summary, and I'll hand it back to you, Mr. Croft, for discussion.
Thank you, Vlad. Any questions, Mr. Polster? Frank, you're muted.
I'm sorry. Could you go back 2 slides? No, I guess it's the next one where you're asking us to do something. So what is it that you're asking us to do in bullet number 2?
For next time, really, for your next meeting, is reflect on today's meeting and the format and how you did the straw voting and how things were presented to you, and see if that's how you want to continue in the role of the planning team and the role of the working group. Does that make sense?
I got it. Rich.
Yes, sir.
I have been disturbed about the fact that we are so process driven. And this is the first opportunity that I feel that we've had to have some internal discussion among the commissioners and hearing the different views. When you look back at how we got here, we voiced something in our last meeting, and then we got input that occurred on a Friday and a Saturday, and then the meeting on a Monday. And I still haven't seen the slides that Leanne put together, and that's probably me. I mean, I don't know. Were they sent out?
I don't think the ones for that we saw.
I know we didn't. And so I'm going back to something that I said at the very beginning of this process when we first met, which it is very helpful to have the read aheads beforehand so that you can comment on them. And so now we're being driven again from a discussion today to another one in less than a week to be able to talk about something about whether we want to be hands-on or not, and let's vote on it, when I don't know what those issues are and haven't had the chance. Now, as much as I agree with what Leanne has put together, the devil is always in the details. And some of us, I know most of us, have gone through the specific strategies and actions for those 9 goals. So I'm okay, but we need to have the information beforehand to be able to digest and comment so that when we have a meeting, at least we have an opportunity to see what other members have to say about it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so all I'm trying to do is to get to a point where we can promote a discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. And I must say, I think that this meeting was a bit of an exception as far as the sheer volume of data, of information. And I know it was evolving through last week, and maybe that's why we didn't see all the slides today. But I think for the vast majority of our meetings, we do get them all ahead of time. But your point is well taken. And I think the discussion for next week the next meeting on the PC working group role in plan development is a real fluid thing. In other words, based on what we've been doing up to this point, does the group, would they rather get the more detailed briefing slides ahead of time, vote yes or no, to say whether we're in concurrence with that, or do we want less of that hands-on and more of a just advise and consent role? And so I think, I don't think there's any critical information that we need for that discussion at our next meeting, but I think it's just an opportunity to say, do you like this process so far, or would you rather have less detailed involvement in it?
Well, I think you're right. That's exactly the question. And from my point of view, I would like more hands-on, period.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Excuse me, may I?
Tammy,
add
yes.
in a comment. This is Tammy Rosario. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure for the viewing public, they understood that all of the materials that were presented tonight were published as part of this packet and posted a week ago. So I wouldn't want anyone to feel like there wasn't any material that they couldn't access. It was part of the presentation materials that were posted.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. Julie, you had your hand up?
Yeah. Yes. I'm just curious, is tonight's discussion hands-on or guidance and oversight?
I'd say tonight's was definitely hands-on.
Okay.
It was a combination. I think it was a combination. We were adding specific items to, whether to modify goals and so on and so forth, but also oversight as far as, the next steps. So that's a good question.
Chances are that's where we're going to end up.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments? All right. Well, first, my apologies to the representatives from the Economic Development area and Parks and Recreation. The meeting did go quite long, and I don't think it would do your chapters any justice at this point to try to get into a discussion, considering the time of the evening. So we'll move those items to a future agenda. And I'll ask staff or the consultant team if you have any final comments.
None.
None? Okay.
No, not on the consultant side.
Okay. In that case, then, may I have a motion to adjourn to the October 19th PC Working Group meeting at 4 p.m.?
So
Julie,
moved,
so
Mrs.
moved.
Jenny.
Great, thank you. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you all. Thanks for all your inputs.
Good night, everybody.
Right.